The morning of my 27th birthday, I came downstairs to find my camera bag gone. Not misplaced, not borrowed, gone. The hook where I always hung it by the back door, empty. The shelf in the hallway where I kept my backup lenses in their padded cases, cleared. I stood there in my socks on the cold kitchen tile and just stared, the way you stare at something that doesn't make sense yet, waiting for your brain to catch up. My mother was at the stove making pancakes. She didn't turn around. "Mom," I said, "where's my camera bag?" She flipped a pancake. "Your father handled it." That sentence. I've turned it over in my mind 1,000 times since. Your father handled it, like it was a utility bill, like it was something that needed to be handled. I'd been a photographer for 6 years by then. Not hobbyist, not side hustle. Professional. I second shot weddings on weekends, did portraits for families and seniors, picked up commercial gigs for local businesses whenever I could get them. I'd built my kit piece by piece, lens by lens, starting with a used body I bought with babysitting money when I was 19. My main camera at that point was a Sony A7 IV I'd saved 14 months for. My 85mm portrait lens alone had cost me $800. I had 2 speed lights, a full set of triggers, a light meter, memory cards, filters, a travel tripod, a full-size studio tripod, a backdrop system, a set of strobes I used for commercial work. All of it together, if I'd tried to replace it, would have run me close to $12,000. My father came in from the garage. He had that look on his face, the one I'd learned to recognize growing up, the tight jaw, the eyes that don't quite meet yours, that told me he already knew this was going to be a fight and had decided in advance that he was going to win it. "Dad," I said, "where's my equipment?" I sold it. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. Something inside me went very, very quiet. "You sold it," I repeated. "Your brother needs tuition for the spring semester. We didn't have enough liquid." My brother, Reston, was 22 and in his second year at a private law school in Charlotte. Tuition was about $48,000 a year. My parents had been paying it partly out of savings, partly out of a PLUS loan my father had taken out in his name. Somewhere in that math, they'd come up short, and rather than call Reston and tell him to look into his own loan options, which is what any reasonable person would have done, my father had walked into the hallway, taken my camera bag off the hook, gone to the shelf for the lenses and accessories, and sold the whole thing to a camera resale shop downtown for $4,200. $4,200 for $12,000 worth of professional equipment. That was my livelihood, I said. He looked at me steadily. "You live under this roof. You contribute." I'd moved back home 8 months earlier. I want to be clear about why, because it matters. I'd moved back to help them. My mother had gone through a health scare the year before. Nothing life-threatening, it turned out, but for a few months we hadn't known that, and I'd given up my apartment in Asheville to come back and be nearby while she recovered. I was paying them $800 a month in rent. I was covering my own groceries, my own phone, my own insurance. I was working out of that house, doing video calls with clients in the dining room, running my editing software on my laptop at the kitchen table. I had been nothing but responsible. And my father had sold my tools. I asked him where he'd sold them. He told me the name of the shop, Clearview Camera Exchange, about 20 minutes away. I knew the place. I'd bought my first used lens there years ago. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed. I looked at my hands. Here's what I knew. I had a wedding to shoot in 6 weeks, a family portrait session the following weekend, 2 headshot bookings already deposited. Without my equipment, I had nothing. I couldn't shoot. I couldn't earn. Every booking on my calendar would have to be canceled or handed off to someone else, and the reputation hit alone could take me months to recover from. Here is what else I knew: my father had stolen from me. It didn't matter that my name was on his lease, that I called him Dad, that my mother had made me birthday pancakes this morning while he was selling my career out of the back of his car. He had taken my property without my knowledge or consent and sold it for cash. That is theft. I sat there for a long time. Long enough for the pancakes to get cold downstairs, For my mother to knock on my door and ask if I was coming down, for me to say no. Then I called Clearview Camera Exchange. The man who answered was named Dale. I'd met him a few times over the years. Older guy, patient, the kind of person who actually knows cameras. I told him my name, told him my father had come in that morning with the Sony A7 IV, a set of lenses, lighting equipment. I told him those items had been taken from me without my consent. I told him I was willing to come in with proof of purchase for every single item. There was a pause. I wondered about that, Dale said quietly. He told me the items were still there. They hadn't processed the sale fully yet, hadn't put anything on the floor. He said he couldn't just hand everything back over the counter without documentation, but if I came in with proof of purchase, it was worth having a conversation. I went to my laptop. I pulled up every receipt. I keep everything, every Amazon order confirmation, every B&H invoice, every PayPal record. I printed them out on the printer in my room, 12 pages, time-stamped and itemized. I took them downstairs, walked past my father without saying a word, got in my car, and drove to Clearview. Dale looked at the receipts. He looked at the equipment sitting in the back. He looked at me. Your dad signed something saying he was the owner, he said. He wasn't, I said. Every receipt has my name and my email address on it. The camera body is registered to me with Sony. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Give me a few minutes." He made a phone call. I don't know who he called, his lawyer, his business partner, someone. When he came back out, he told me he was going to return the equipment to me. He said he'd have to deal with the money side with my father separately. He didn't say it in an unkind way. He just looked tired, the way people look when they've been put in the middle of someone else's mess. I loaded everything into my car. My hands were shaking the whole time. Not from fear, from something that felt closer to grief or rage or the particular kind of devastation that comes from realizing someone you love is capable of something you never thought they'd do. I drove home. I did not go inside. I sat in my car in the driveway and thought for a very long time. And here is what I decided. I was not going to walk back into that house and have the same fight again. I was not going to let my father apologize and then watch it happen a different way, 6 months from now. I was not going to let my mother make me pancakes and pretend this morning had been a minor misunderstanding. I called my college roommate, Petra. She lived 25 minutes away with her husband. I asked if I could stay with them for a few days while I figured things out. She didn't ask a single question, just said yes. Come now, we have a guest room. I went inside the house one time. My father was in the living room. My mother was somewhere down the hall. I went upstairs. I pulled out the 2 largest suitcases I owned, and I packed everything that mattered: my clothes, my laptop, my hard drives, my passport, my financial documents, my camera bag. I was methodical. I was calm. I did not rush, and I did not linger. When I came downstairs with the first suitcase, my father stood up. "What are you doing?" "Moving out," I said. "Ivy?" "Don't," I said. He started to say something about overreacting, about how he'd made a decision for the family, how I wasn't seeing the bigger picture, how Reston's education was an investment. I let him talk. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I just made 2 trips to my car, loaded my suitcases into the trunk next to my camera equipment, and drove away. I didn't cry until I got to Petra's. I cried for about an hour, and then I stopped, and then I started making a plan. The first thing I did was consult a lawyer. I have a friend from college, Scott, who passed the bar 2 years ago and now does family and civil law. I explained the situation to him over the phone the next morning. He confirmed what I already suspected. My father had committed theft, technically. The fact that I lived in his house did not give him the right to sell my property. The fact that he was my parent did not give him the right to sell my property. I could have pursued it. I had grounds. I decided not to, not because I forgave him, but because I wanted this to be over in a way that pursuing charges might not accomplish. What I wanted was to never be financially dependent on my parents again. What I wanted was a clean exit. Scott also pointed out something else. I'd been paying them $800 a month in rent for 8 months. That was $6,400. The camera equipment they'd sold for $4,200. I'd more than covered their shortfall with rent already. My father hadn't been short on money because of me. He'd been short on money because they'd committed to a law school tuition they couldn't actually afford and hadn't thought through what happened when the math stopped working. I let that sit. I found an apartment 2 weeks later, a one-bedroom in a complex about 15 minutes from where I'd been working most of my client base. The rent was $1,400 a month, which was tight but manageable if I kept my bookings up. I put down first and last, signed the lease, and moved in on a Saturday with Petra and her husband helping me carry boxes. My parents texted a lot at first. My mother called and left voicemails that went from confused to sad to something that sounded almost like angry, as though I'd done something to her by leaving. My father sent a text that said, "We need to talk about this as a family." I did not respond. My brother called. That was the one I'd been waiting for in some ways. Reston and I had never been close in the way that some siblings are, but we weren't enemies. He's 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one who went to every family event, remembered every birthday, called Mom every Sunday. He was the good one, the golden one maybe, though I'd never let myself use that word until now. He apologized. Right away, before I could say anything, he said he was sorry, that he hadn't known what Dad had done until after, that he'd confronted him about it. I believed him. Reston's a lot of things, but he's not a liar. He should have called me, Reston said. I would have figured something out. Would you, though? I asked. He didn't answer right away. I could have taken out a grad Pellis loan, he said finally. The interest rate's not great, but it's not catastrophic. Lots of people do it. I know, I said. People pay back law school loans for 20 years. It's not ideal, but it's a real option. Dad just didn't want to have that conversation with you. There was a long silence on the phone. I'm going to pay you back, he said. Not right away. I can't right now, but when I'm working, I'll pay you back. I told him I appreciated that. I meant it. But I also told him that what happened wasn't something money was going to fully fix, because it wasn't really about the money. It was about my father deciding that my things, my work, my future, were available to him whenever he needed them. It was about my mother standing at that stove making pancakes and not saying a word. Reston said, "That's fair." We still talk. Not often, but some. I don't hold it against him. He was a piece of this, but he wasn't the one who walked into the hallway and took my bag off the hook. I put the word out to every photographer I knew in the area that I was available for second shooting, and within a week, I had 3 bookings to replace the income I'd been worried about. I shot the wedding I'd already committed to using a rental kit from a local shop. It cost me $400 to rent for the weekend, which ate into my margin, but I delivered the gallery on time and the couple was happy. I did not cancel a single client. Within 3 months, I had replaced most of my equipment. Not all at once, I was strategic about it, prioritizing what I needed for the work I was booking. The body first, then the portrait lens, then the strobes. I bought smarter this time, kept everything documented, serial numbers photographed and stored in cloud backup, receipts forwarded to a dedicated email folder the day of purchase. My business actually grew that fall. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I was working harder. Maybe I was more focused now that I wasn't spending emotional energy on managing my relationship with my parents. Maybe it was just timing. I picked up a contract with a real estate brokerage that needed consistent interior and exterior shots, which gave me a reliable monthly anchor. I raised my wedding rates. I started getting referrals from the families I'd shot the previous year. By December, I was making more than I'd ever made before. My father reached out in November. He said he wanted to talk. I agreed to meet him for coffee at a neutral place on a Saturday morning. He sat across from me with his hands around his mug and told me he'd been wrong. He didn't dress it up. He said he'd made a decision that wasn't his to make, that he'd rationalized it in ways that didn't hold up, that he understood if I needed more time. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the morning of my birthday. I thought about my mother at the stove. I told him I accepted his apology. I did. Not because everything was fine, but because carrying the anger was starting to cost me more than it was costing him. But I also told him clearly, I would not be moving back home. I would not be sharing financial information with either of them. I would not be the backup plan for anything, not Reston's tuition, not their mortgage, not a medical bill, not a home repair. I was not available for that. He nodded. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him look. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Just don't do it again, I said. To anyone. We see each other now at holidays. It's not warm exactly, but it's not hostile. My mother is careful around me in the way people are careful when they know they've used up some goodwill they can't get back. She doesn't ask about money. She doesn't ask about clients or equipment or how the business is going, which is probably wise. Reston graduated last spring. He's clerking for a judge in Raleigh now, starting salary 60,000, which for a first year isn't bad. He texted me when he got the job. I told him I was proud of him, and I meant that too. He hasn't paid me back yet. I'm not holding my breath. That's not bitterness. I genuinely don't need it now. But I notice I haven't forgotten either. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about a moment like this. The hard part isn't the conflict. It's not even the loss, though that was real and it hurt in ways that are difficult to describe. Losing your tools is losing your capability, and for a while I felt hollowed out in a way that had nothing to do with money. The hard part is deciding what you're going to do next, whether you're going to let it flatten you or build something on top of it. I built something on top of it. I have my own apartment now, my own lease in my own name, my own shelves where I keep my equipment bag right next to the door. Every morning when I leave to shoot, I pick it up, and I feel the weight of it, and I think, this one is mine. Nobody's going to sell it. I still think about the hook by the back door sometimes. The empty hook. That's the image that stayed with me longer than any of the rest of it. Not my father's face, not the conversation in the kitchen, just that bare spot on the wall where my bag was supposed to be. What happened to me had a logic to it, even if it took me a while to see it clearly. My father made a choice that treated my work as a resource he was entitled to draw from, and that choice had consequences, not dramatic ones, not the kind you see in movies, but quiet, permanent ones. He lost something he can't buy back, the version of our relationship where I trusted him completely. That's how these things tend to work. Not punishment from outside, just the natural result of the thing itself. You take from someone without asking, and eventually they stop leaving things within reach. I think about what it actually took to get through those months after I left. Not just the practical stuff, the rental kit, the apartment search, the client calls, but the internal work. I had to be honest with myself about what I was feeling, which was not just anger but something closer to shame. This irrational, quiet shame that I had somehow let this happen. Working through that honestly, without pretending it away, was harder than finding a new apartment. Clarity about what is actually true, even when it's uncomfortable. That's what made it possible to move forward instead of just staying stuck in how unfair it all was. And then there's the part that nobody really talks about, which is what you do with the wreckage. Because it's easy to imagine that once you leave a bad situation, the hard part is over. It isn't. The hard part is building something real on the other side when you're scared and tired and not sure it's going to work. I had weddings to shoot without my own equipment. I had clients who deposited money and were counting on me. I had bills starting the first of the month. None of that cared about what my father had done. I had to show up anyway, and I had to keep showing up, week after week, even when I didn't feel like it. That persistence, not inspiration, not talent, just the decision to keep going when it would be easier to fall apart, that's what actually turned it around. What I know now is that those three things together are what got me out. The honesty to see clearly, the integrity to act on what I knew was right, and the stubbornness to keep building even when it was hard. None of them were glamorous. None of them felt heroic in the moment. They just felt like the next thing to do. My kit is fully rebuilt now. Better than before, actually. Everything in it I bought myself. With money I earned myself, and it sits by the door of an apartment that is entirely mine. When I pick up that bag in the morning, I'm not thinking about my father. I'm thinking about the shoot, that shift, from the story of what was done to me to the work I'm doing now. That's the whole thing, really. That's where you actually end up when you choose not to let it define you. The hook by the back door is just a hook now. What hangs on it is mine,